Who should you start? Who should you sit in week 2? What's going on, fantasy football fans? It's Mitch here, back with another start and sit video. 4 starts, 4 sits at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end for week 2 of the 2024 fantasy season. If that sounds good, spike the like button and subscribe for weekly starts and sits and fantasy advice just like this. Comment any questions you have at all for me. If you want any advice regarding fantasy football, your lineup this week, adds and drops, trades, let me know in the comments section below. And let's get started with 4 starts at the quarterback position. Start Tua versus the Bills. What I love about this matchup for Tua is not only is he already leading the NFL in passing yards after 1 game, but it's the middle of the field that will be vacant from Teron Johnson at the nickel spot for the Bills. It's a high-flying, high-scoring Miami night on a Thursday night versus Josh Allen on the other side. Tua and Miami knows they got to keep up with the big man. And Jalen Waddle and Tyreek in the middle of the field with those crossing routes feels like money to me. I think Tua's going to have another 300-yard day here. They're going to need it if they're going to beat the Bills and Josh Allen. My second start for week 2 at quarterback is Baker Mayfield versus the Detroit Lions. This is also a game that I expect to be a shootout. Baker was excellent in week 1 versus a really weak Washington defense at home. He threw 4 touchdowns. He was one of the best starts of the week. I actually expect him to be a sneaky start for the rest of the season, but specifically in this spot, he did well against Detroit last playoffs. Mike Evans had like 200 yards, and I think Chris Godwin can kind of replicate Cooper Kupp's success from week 1 against this same defense. McMillan looks real good as a rookie. I love the status of the offensive line. White, Irving can catch the football out of the backfield. Detroit, I'm not convinced they're that much better in the secondary. I think Baker can have success. Detroit is going to have success on offense because Antoine Winfield is out. They're missing pass rushers. They're missing corners. The Bucs defense is in absolute brutal status. So I believe Baker is going to need to rise to the occasion in a high-scoring game. So start Baker Mayfield. The third start at quarterback this week is Matthew Stafford versus the Arizona Cardinals. It's Matthew Stafford. I don't have to explain. The offensive line is in rough shape, but he still has Cooper Kupp. And that connection, it looks to be in good form for sure. Puka Nacua might be out, but I like what I saw from Tyler Johnson. Demarcus Robinson can step up. I feel like this is going to be a high-scoring game. Again, another one. The Cardinals can move the ball. They can score points. The Rams' defense is not the strongest in the league, and it's playing on the road here. This is another dome environment for Stafford. He looked crisp. He looked accurate. He was just beautiful in terms of getting the ball to the right spot at the right time, getting rid of the football early to protect his offensive line. I think McVay is once again going to put the ball in Stafford's hands in this game and have him throw it. And I think he's going to play really well again. Expect him and Kupp to torch this Cardinal defense all day long. The fourth start at quarterback is Brock Purdy versus the Minnesota Vikings. Another quarterback that plays in a dome. Now, Purdy did struggle against the Vikings last year on a Monday night, but I expect there to be more answers. Last year, no Debo, no Trent Williams. 2 big pieces for the comfort of Brock Purdy. Now, McCaffrey might be out, but that might be a reason to actually throw the ball more. The Vikings were a good run defense last year. They were good in week 1 against the Giants, and I actually think their weakness is in the secondary. Brandon Ayuk, Debo Samuel. If Flores does decide to blitz, the man beaters are there. Ayuk could have a great day. Debo on screens could have a great day. George Kittle against one-on-one, these linebackers or safeties could torch them. So I like Purdy here to have a huge bounce back against an opponent that got the upper hand on him last year. I don't think that happens twice. I think Purdy goes out there in a dome setting and puts up some points. So give me Brock Purdy. He also has a very stable floor with the best offense in the league. My quarterback sits for week 2, Joe Burrow versus the Chiefs. people are going to want to start Joe Burrow because of the success he's had against the Chiefs in the past. But I just feel like the floor is too low for Burrow in this matchup to the point where I'd just rather start a Brock Purdy. I'd rather start a Baker Mayfield. The way that Burrow and the offense looked in week 1, I'm not willing to lose my week on the chance that it connects. I'm going to wait until it works out until I start him again. It's not like he has the rushing upside to where I can count on a solid floor. He only has that passing upside. So to me, like, I feel a Brock Purdy, a Baker, a Tua, just safer matchups, better matchups than the Chiefs, who have Chris Jones, a good secondary, a darn good defense. And really, he doesn't have T. Higgins. So Bengals seemingly are working their way into this season. They always start slow. Just back the trend of Burrow starting slow and sit him on your bench until he proves otherwise. Justin Herbert versus Carolina. I'm making this a sit because a lot of people are going to want to start the quarterback that's playing Carolina. Did you just see what Derek Carr did to the Carolina Panthers? But again, Herbert has next to zero weapons, and this is an offense that doesn't want to pass the ball. Like J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, they're going to run the ball. They're going to get stops on defense. They're going to protect the football through the air. I didn't think Herbert looked great in week 1 against the Raiders. And yes, the Panthers are an easier matchup, but they could just as easily run the ball as pass the ball. So I just don't feel like there's a ceiling. Once they get to the third or fourth quarter and they're in the lead, they're not going to want to throw it. So Herbert is not a great matchup despite playing a terrible team. Trevor Lawrence versus Cleveland. Cleveland was the best pass defense in football last year. Last week, they looked great against Dak. They allowed under 200 yards. They allowed only like 60 yards to CeeDee Lamb, one of the best targets in football. Trevor Lawrence was not very appealing against Miami last week. He didn't play very well. He didn't have a lot of yards. He didn't have a lot of fantasy points. I think he only threw 1 touchdown. So, yeah, I just don't love the matchup. It's a defensive game. They can win this by running the football. They can win this by playing defense. They're at home. That's nice. But to me, it's the Cleveland defense with their full secondary and Myles Garrett, and the offensive line for Trevor Lawrence is not very good. My fourth and final sit at the quarterback position is Aaron Rodgers versus the Tennessee Titans. The Titans secondary, the Titans defense didn't even allow 100 yards on the road to Caleb Williams, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, that potent receiving core everyone had high expectations for. And I understand Rodgers is no rookie, but L'Jarius Sneed, Roger McCreary, Chidobe Awuzie, this secondary in Tennessee is legit. They have Jeff Simmons. Sweat looked the part on defense. Harold Landry. Like, the Jets offense did not look good enough to consistently be starting Aaron Rodgers. He gives you no rushing upside. All you're looking for is passing touchdowns here. And I would expect this game to be pretty defensive based on the first week. The Jets defense will want to bounce back big time. They're playing Will Levis. Rodgers understands that. He's going to manage the game. He's going to protect the ball. Not a lot of chances here. So just not a great fantasy play for week 2. At the running back position, we're starting Jordan Mason versus the Minnesota Vikings. If McCaffrey is for sure out, check. Jordan Mason is without a doubt a play in every lineup. I do not care if he's RB1, RB2, or flex. He's in your lineup. He went off against the Jets. He's probably going to score a touchdown every game that he's a starter in because that's what McCaffrey does as well. He doesn't have the reception upside or the pure explosion that McCaffrey has. But man, this guy's got a very high floor. This is one of, if not the best rushing offense in football, with Kyle Shanahan calling it, and this offensive line looking even better than last year. I think Mason is a real football player, a real player. And he's going against, yes, a good run defense, but he's definitely a start considering they're 6-point favorites on the road. They're going to want to milk the clock, run the ball in the second half. Mason is a great start. J.K. Dobbins versus Carolina. Chargers, favorites of like 6.5. Dobbins was awesome in the first game against the Raiders when he got his opportunity. I expect even more touches this week because they kind of understand what they have now. They weren't quite sure before. He looked explosive. He was hitting home runs. And against Carolina, they gave up a lot more rushing yards than I would have thought against Alvin Kamara. That's not a good sign because the Saints don't have a good O-line. The Saints don't have a good rushing scheme. Man, to me, the opposite is true for the Chargers. Their O-line looked good last week. They have a good rushing scheme. Dobbins is their starter. Dobbins could have multiple touchdowns. He could win you your fantasy week this week as an RB2, which is huge upside for your lineup. My third start at running back this week is Najee Harris once again versus the Denver Broncos. The Broncos were a terrible run defense last year, terrible tackling team last year. They gave up some big runs against Kenneth Walker. I expect the Steelers to really run the ball in this game. That is their biggest advantage on offense in this game. Along with Justin Fields' legs, it's Najee Harris. He got 20 attempts last week. They want to play defense. They want to run the ball. Najee is a featured back, and he's playing definitely a weaker run D than last week. Atlanta was one of the best in success rate in 2023. The Broncos, one of the worst. So I like this matchup a lot more in week number 2. And my fourth and final start at running back is Brian Robinson versus the New York Giants. Robinson actually looked pretty promising last week, catching the football more than expected. He was breaking tackles. He looked like the most dynamic element outside of Jaden Daniels' legs in the Commanders' offense. So start him in a game where the Commanders could definitely be winning, definitely are going to score points. The Giants look terrible in their secondary. They're giving up passes left and right, and if they get to the red zone, Robinson likely will get the ball and likely will score. So I love him as a flex or an RB2 this week. My running back sits, beginning with Jerome Ford versus the Jacksonville Jags. Jacksonville is low-key a really good run D. They were sneaky good last season. They added Eric Armstead of the 49ers, and their D-line absolutely shut down every runner of the Miami Dolphins last week. Not a good sign for Cleveland, who run a similar West Coast-inspired Shanahan-like running game like Miami. Now, they do have a better offensive line in Cleveland, but because Deshaun Watson is so terrible and there's no David Njoku, there's that much more incentive to shut down the run against the Browns. So I don't expect him to really do anything. Maybe he scores a cheap touchdown, but I don't see the ceiling for Ford in this game. It's going to be a low-scoring game. My second sit is Zamir White versus the Ravens. My problem here is the Raiders are like 8.5-point dogs. They're on the road in Baltimore. This feels like more of an Alexander Mattison play because he's the pass catcher. Meanwhile, Zamir White is a first and second down grinder, not on a team that's expected to win. So that means he's not going to be on the field as much. It's just not a good play against a solid run D and a team that's likely going to be ahead in the Ravens. My third sit at running back is DeAndre Swift versus the Houston Texans on Sunday Night Football. Swift was not very good in week 1. The Texans do have a good run defense. They shut down Jonathan Taylor pretty well, as good as you can do in week number 1. And Swift does not have that same offensive line. He's not nearly the talent of Jonathan Taylor. I just don't see how Swift has a good game outside of maybe if it's in garbage time, he gets some catches. So if you're super desperate, maybe, but I just don't see the upside running the football in this game. The Bears look soft up front. Their offensive line did not play well. I don't expect much from Swift against the Texans. Javonte Williams versus Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh did a good job against Bijan. He still got his points. He still caught his passes. Javonte did not get the ball very much against Seattle as much as I expected. And as soon as the Broncos were trailing, Jaleel McLaughlin became the starter for the most part. So that's not good news. Now, this game should be closer. This game script should definitely be competitive and back and forth. But the Steelers are good against the run. They've got a great front seven. And I think the split snaps makes it so that Javonte Williams just doesn't have a lot of upside. So he is my final sit at running back. Now, transitioning to wide receiver. My first wide receiver start is Drake London versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Drake London was not super effective against the Steelers defense and Joey Porter Jr., but I expect him to be better against Slay or Quinyon Mitchell, the rookie. London does have a size advantage against both of these guys, and I think in a big game setting, Kirk Cousins is going to want to find his go-to guy, and that is Drake London. I expect a big bounce back, so if you're considering sitting him for whatever reason, don't. I think the Falcons are definitely in a different game script here. They're going to have to throw the ball. This is not a grinded out affair against the Steelers. This is going to be a high-flying game against the Eagles, and Drake London should see his best game so far this year. Definitely. He has better corner matchups and more incentive to catch the football in this one. Marvin Harrison Jr. versus the Rams. If Marvin Harrison Jr. does not get on track in this game, we're officially in trouble because the Rams do not have good corners. Tre'Davious White is completely washed. He is completely cooked. And Darius Williams on IR, there's no one that can cover him on that team. Kyler definitely has probably been hearing it all week, why aren't you throwing it to Marvin Harrison? Why aren't you throwing it to Marvin Harrison? We got to get Marvin involved. We've got to get him involved. So I just expect him to get a lot of targets, especially early in this game. And if it does become a shootout, then it's going to be a lot of passes for the Cardinals. So expect Marvin Harrison to get on track this week. Don't sit him. Don't get mad at him just yet. Be patient. My third start at wide receiver is Jameson Williams versus Tampa Bay. Now, this is one that people are actually going to be excited about, not like Drake London or Marvin Harrison, where people might be hesitant to not sit them, right? With Jameson, they're going to be excited because of what he did on Sunday night against the Rams. I think that he should have another good game. This is one that looks good to me. Tampa's aggressive. Tampa likes to blitz. Tampa's going to try to get home on Jared Goff. And if they don't, that's going to leave less people in the secondary. And Jameson is really fast, and he can break a game open. So deep crossers, just go balls in general. He scored a touchdown last year against Tampa, and that was when he was never involved at all. So I could see Jameson breaking this game open and having multiple long plays against a Bucs secondary that's susceptible to explosives. My fourth and final start for week number 2 at wide receiver is Adonai Mitchell versus the Packers. Mitchell looked like he was about to have a massive game against the Texans. If they didn't miss on a couple connections between Richardson and Mitchell, it would have been a huge explosive start for the rookie. He looked good. He ran well. He was separating. We know that he's got great hands. He's got the size. He'd be, maybe in the slot a little bit, outside. He's playing a Packers secondary that's got Alexander, who will likely be drawing Pittman, but then that number 2, number 3 are a lot weaker. So I would expect Mitchell to torch one of these guys pretty consistently, and Richardson should be looking for him down the field based on what he showed in week 1. So look out for a couple big plays from the rookie. He actually is an intriguing flex option. Maybe not in a lot of lineups, depending on who you have, but I definitely feel like there are worse options in week 2. My wide receiver sits. The Green Bay receivers in general against the Colts. If Malik Willis is the quarterback, which I fully expect, Malik Willis cannot throw the ball. He could barely execute a Hail Mary pass. He is not good at all. All he could do is run. Just don't start these guys. There's really, even Reed, I wouldn't start. He was amazing, and they're probably going to try to manufacture touches to him. Maybe there's that floor as a wide receiver 3, but Malik Willis is terrible, guys. Just take it from me. He's just not good enough to get the ball to Watson, Dobbs, to Reed. So I would sit these guys against the Colts. Calvin Ridley against the Jets. He's drawing Sauce Gardner probably for a majority of the game. Will Levis could barely hit anything out there last week. We saw the meme. He just was really bad, Will Levis. And I don't expect it to get much better against the Jets defense that's now going to be hungry and angry after Monday Night Football. My third sit at wide receiver is Courtland Sutton against Pittsburgh. Joey Porter Jr. is a big, long, physical corner who did great against Drake London, who's basically a better version of Courtland Sutton. I would not start Sutton given how Bo Nix looked. I think he's not going to do very well in this game, and I don't think Sutton can really create the separation against the young corner in Porter. And then Brian Thomas Jr., he's my most hesitant sit of the week, but I wanted to go with a Jacksonville receiver. I decided on Brian Thomas. Denzel Ward is likely going to cover him a majority of the time, and Denzel Ward, in my opinion, is a top 3 man coverage corner in football. The Browns like to play man, and I think Ward can stick with him from a speed perspective. Thomas is the bigger player, but I just don't think that Trevor Lawrence is going to force the ball down the field that many times. Now, maybe he catches one deep ball, one explosive play that turns the tide, but I don't necessarily think there's going to be a lot of volume going his way, especially if he draws that specific matchup. So just don't love the Jacksonville receivers in general against that Browns secondary. My tight end starts Dalton Kincaid versus Miami on Thursday night. I think Kincaid will bounce back in a statistical fashion. The Cardinals were doubling Kincaid a lot. I don't expect Miami to do that and treat him with that much respect, especially after the week 1 performance. Kincaid is good, but I don't know how many teams, especially Miami, are going to treat him with that much respect. So I actually think because of that, he's going to have a much better day, catch a few passes, and being that Miami is likely going to score points, Kincaid's going to have that much more opportunity to put up some fantasy points. My second start at tight end is Brock Bowers versus the Ravens. Biggest reasoning is Patrick Queen looked missed on this defense last week against the Chiefs, and I think the middle of the field is somewhere that you can attack the Ravens. And I think Minshew's going to be looking for Bowers. They were looking for him on deep corner routes, on underneath, yak plays, and even over the middle. I feel like Bowers is going to be out there a lot in 12 personnel, out there as a slot, out there in the backfield. He moves around a lot, but they're going to find a way to get him the ball against this Ravens defense. Kyle Pitts against the Eagles. I just really like the mismatches in this game. The Eagles have terrible linebackers. Their safeties are pretty slow. I don't think anyone on the Eagles can truly cover Pitts one-on-one. And being that the Eagles are going to score, have a good offense, Kirk Cousins going to have to throw it. And Drake London is the start. I think Kyle Pitts is as well. He made the end zone. He appeared there, which hasn't really happened that much in his career. But he could do it again this week, and I wouldn't be shocked given the matchups. Hunter Henry versus Seattle. Hunter Henry is a talented player and arguably the most talented receiver on the Patriots. Seattle, the area of weakness for them, I would argue, is the middle of the field, like safeties and linebackers. And Henry played a ton of snaps against Cincinnati. He just didn't see a ton of volume, but he's playing a lot more than his counterpart, Austin Hooper. Jacoby Brissett off of play action. Given how much they ran the ball against Cincinnati, Seattle will be all over the run game, which means that will suck them up for play action over the top. Henry's also a third down chain mover and a red zone target for this offense. He did get a pretty big red zone target in that game against Cincy. They just didn't connect. Henry is one of those players that if you're not great at tight end, I don't mind the matchup this week against the Seahawks. Tight end sits, Evan Ingram versus Cleveland, the best team against tight ends last year. They pretty much allowed nothing to Jake Ferguson before he got injured, and Ingram didn't really play the full complement of snaps that we expected last week, so there's a little bit to worry about there. Then we have Taysom Hill against Dallas. I don't love this matchup because I feel like Taysom is more involved when they're winning in games, and he didn't really see that many targets. He didn't play that many tight end snaps. He only really ran the ball 5 times. There wasn't a lot of volume or not a lot of want to involved Taysom Hill. Now, maybe it'll be different against Dallas. Who knows? He's a complete wild card. He's always worth a little bit of a dart throw. I just don't think this is the environment where it really works for him in his favor because I just don't expect the Saints to get in the red zone a ton, in range for Taysom to score touchdowns. So I think Taysom is a sit. Cole Kmet versus Houston. They're actually playing Gerald Everett more, which is kind of odd because Kmet's a better player, but that's just the way they're doing it with Shane Waldron. And with DJ Moore there and Keenan Allen, he's like 3rd or 4th, probably 4th, maybe 5th in targets, depending on DeAndre Swift and Gerald Everett. So yeah, there's just no relevance here. He's a name that's been good in the past, but he's a good player, I think. He's just not being utilized in that fashion. And Caleb, the way he's struggling, I just don't see how he's a good play this week. And my 4th and final sit is Dalton Schultz against Chicago. Chicago has great linebackers. Chicago has pretty good safeties. They're good in the middle of the field in coverage. And being that Diggs, Tank Dell, and Nico Collins are all healthy, even Joe Mixon, Schultz just feels like the 4th or 5th guy in the receiving game and only really gets checkdowns or underneath targets. So he just doesn't have a high ceiling unless he scores a touchdown. So he's the final sit in this video. I hope you guys enjoyed the starts and sits for week number 2. Good luck this week. Hope you guys win. Let me know if you have any questions for me in the comment section below. It's Mitch. Peace.